I'm back again, your host with the most information about nurses. Today, on this platform, Nurses Forum with Lovers, we're going to be deliberating yet again another exciting program that the nurses and all the medical practitioners can benefit from. This is OET, and today we're focusing on writing task. As you know that OET is about 4 sub-tests. That's the writing that we're going to be discussing or looking and exploring today, as well as we have reading, we have listening, and we have speaking. So today we're going to be looking at letter writing. So without further ado, let's look into what writing is all about. So OET writing task has different ways of tackling it. What you need to do or to know most is, whom are you writing to? Are you writing to a medical practitioner or a non-medical practitioner? Okay, if you're writing to a medical practitioner, what that's supposed to mean is that your language in the letter is to be medical, so you can include medical jargon in this case. But if you're writing to a non-medical practitioner, you have to shy away from the medical jargon and remain on the layman way of speaking or way of writing. So examples of medical practitioners are the doctors or the GPs, the nurses, the dietitians, the physiotherapists, just to mention a few. Non-medical practitioners like social workers, among others, just to mention just a few, just an example for you to understand what a medical or non-medical practitioner is about or is like. So what you need to do is now to be able to understand, first of all, so you're given a task whereby you have to read through. So the total amount of time you are given in writing is 45 minutes. All right, 45 minutes is what you have to complete all the needed areas, to attend to all the needed and expected areas in the letter writing. So the different, of course, reasons why you should write the letter. Sometimes it's a referral, sometimes it's a request, sometimes there are many reasons, or it's a discharge of a patient by the doctor or by the doctor really. So in this case, we are talking of a letter writing by the nurse referring a patient. It could be to a specialist after the patient has been discharged from the hospital. It could be like a PHN, public health nurse, in the community. So these are the things that we need to look into. How do you put yourself across as a nurse in the letter writing? So your letter should consist of an introduction, one. That's the most important thing, an introduction. Then we have paragraphs. First paragraph, second paragraph. I prefer personally 2 paragraphs. The third paragraph will be like your conclusion. So you have, on the outlook of your letter, you have about 4 paragraphs. The introduction, though we are not including it as a paragraph, but on the lookout of your letter, you'll be having like 4 paragraphs. That's inclusive of the introduction and the 2 paragraphs before your conclusion. So you have at least a layout looking like you have had 4 paragraphs. I think that's really manageable. You wouldn't want to, put a lot of information. Remember, you only have words of 180 to 200, and that's the space. Those are the letters. What do you call them? The words, rather, that you should have in the letter writing. 180 to 200. You can go a little bit above 200, but not beyond 210 or below 180. So your letter should thrive in between 180 to 200. Here's the other tip for you. Use a pencil when you're writing your letter. Do not use a pen and ink, because when you're using a pencil, you can rub, you can make adjustments easily. So use a pencil. So go into the exam date with so many pencils with you, and or go with a sharpener, of course, your rubbers, so that you're able to make adjustments when you want to make any corrections on your letter writing. So I'll also give you tips on how you can structure your writing on the day. How can you divide the 45 minutes into portions that will help you to tackle the letter writing effectively? Okay. But for now, we're going to talk about these steps. I've talked of the introduction and the paragraphs, and then the conclusion. Right. So on the paragraph is marked out of 3. So what does that supposed to mean? Well, I'm not talking about the introductions, as in the address, as in to whom you are writing. I think that's basic information. Everyone knows how to write a letter. If you don't know, ask on the comment section box, and then we'll look into that. Otherwise, we'll spend a lot of time, and people don't have time these days. So you just need what you need. So I'm going to give you what you need. Talking of the introduction. The introduction should consist of 3 aspects. Very critical, very important. 3 aspects in introduction. I said the introduction is marked out of 3. So you have 3 credit on introduction. And what are the examiners looking at? They're looking at a diagnosis. Do you have a diagnosis on your introduction? Diagnosis. Secondly, do we have what we call a time frame, right? The time frame of the letter. There has to be what we call a time frame. We'll look into detail about what we're talking about when we say a time frame. Then thirdly, looking at a purpose. Do we have a purpose in your introduction? So diagnosis, time frame, and purpose. These are 3 aspects that are being looked into on your introduction when you're writing a letter. Okay, so let's look into the diagnosis. What is the current diagnosis this patient is having, or what has prompted us to refer this patient to whoever we are referring to? It could be the doctor or the public health nurse. What is the diagnosis? Are we referring it to a dietitian? Are we referring it to a physiotherapist? Are we referring to who are we referring to? Because that's really guide us. If you're referring to a diabeticness, then our diagnosis has to be in relation to diabetes. Are we referring to a physiotherapist? If you're referring to a physiotherapist, then our diagnosis has to be in relation to the physics of the patient, the physiotherapy, or the physical anatomy, or the physical aspects around the patient. If you are referring to a dietitian, our diagnosis has something to do with the diet of the patient. I think I've made myself clear on that one. So diagnosis. And then secondly, purpose. What is the purpose of referring this patient? Are we referring back the patient into care? Are we referring this patient for continuity of care, or what? What is the purpose of referring this patient? Secondly, that's purpose. Thirdly, we're talking of time frame. For how long have we been having this patient under our care? So the third thing is time frame. So in a nutshell, I'm done with the introduction. I'll give you just an example of an introduction sufficing these 3 aspects that I just mentioned. Okay, I've written down here an introduction for you. Okay. I am writing to transfer Mr. John, who underwent left lung resection. He has been under our care for the past 2 weeks. I am writing to transfer Mr. John, who underwent left lung resection, full stop. He has been under our care for the past 2 weeks. My introduction consists of 2 sentences, and I would like to implore you, to encourage you, at least to have 2 to 3 sentences of an introduction. An introduction is not supposed to unfold what is going to be happening. It should leave the reader in suspense. That's the purpose of an introduction. It has to be intriguing. It has to give the urge to the reader to continue reading and understanding more. This is not just a mere writing. It's a skill that you need to develop. So practice is critical. You need to practice more and more every day until you get to understand what is expected of you. All right. So you can see from a letter, I'm writing to transfer. It's a transfer. So that I can take that as my purpose. The purpose of the letter is to transfer the patient. All right. And the diagnosis is left lung resection. The period or time frame is 2 weeks. This is how long you've been with this patient. Okay. So we are moving on. So that's as far as the introduction is concerned. I said make it so short, 2 to 3 sentences. At most, you can make it 2 sentences. It should not be too long. Then we get into our first paragraph. The first paragraph should consist of what we call extremely relevant information. Okay? Extremely relevant information. You will have been given your task. Okay, and you are given 45 minutes in total to write your letter. The first 5 minutes are for you to read through the task that is at hand, that you will have been given. Let me hasten to say, when you're given the task, first of all, these are the tips that I'm giving you that made me pass and score the highest of a mark in letter writing. When you're given a task, let me hasten to say that go and read the task. At the very end of the total task, there will be the task, something written, the task. That's where you get to understand the gist of the letter, what it is all about. You're given a clue on that end part of the task, what is expected to you. You are given a clue to whom you are writing to and the areas that you need to attend to. Okay, and usually that part comes as part of your intro, of your conclusion, rather comes as part of your conclusion. That's where you can derive some of the information that should come on your conclusion. Okay, so read the very end before you even read everything, that you'll have been given. You'll have understand, or that's the summary of whatever is happening and what you should be attending to. Okay, so you need to read through now the entire task after you've read the conclusion part of the writing task. I hope I've made myself clear there. And so let's look into the first paragraph. Like I said, the first paragraph should consist of what we call extremely relevant information. Extremely relevant information is information about the patient that is current, and it has to be really relevant. You will hear that, or you come across a situation whereby the patient has been attended to before. There's a history. There's some history to talk about in as far as the condition is concerned, or was admitted before and is now under our care, or the patient was admitted about 14 years ago and had a certain diagnosis about or problems that particular patient had. Extremely relevant information is merely referring to what has prompted or what has led this patient to be admitted into our hospital. And that's what we need to put on our first paragraph. We do not have time to waste to talk about the history, to talk about what happened 20 years ago. We need to talk about what prompted this patient to be admitted in our hospital, okay, or into our care. what are the current problems? We talked about the lung resection there. That's our introduction, that's our diagnosis, and the diagnosis has to be the current diagnosis, the current problem of the patient. Now, in our first paragraph, we are addressing what we have mentioned in our introduction. There's to be a connection. We are not divorcing the introduction with the paragraphs. There has to be a marriage. There has to be a flow, a connection between the introduction and the subsequent paragraphs. Okay, I think that's so clear. I think I'm making myself so clear there. So this is very, very fundamental that we address the aspects that are relevant. So it is important for you to draft your letter. And these are the points that you need to draft. You can say on your draft there, if you're writing about the introduction, purpose, time frame, and diagnosis, and you write the purpose, you write the time frame, you write the diagnosis. When you're now writing your letter, you're not going to trouble yourself to look for information to write. Okay, sorry. Let me take some water at this juncture. Right. You are not going to trouble yourself. So what are you going to do now is to, when you're writing at the end of the day, you're simply nailing it. You're nailing it. You're nailing it. Now, when you are doing the draft, you also have to write your introduction, the information that are most relevant, critically relevant, or extremely relevant information. Then on the second paragraph, you're writing the semi-relevant information, okay? Semi-relevant information should now come on your second paragraph. This could be aspects that are related to basically whatever you have been writing on the first paragraph, but still important. You don't want to put everything on your first paragraph. The first paragraph information can still spill over to the second paragraph, depending on the importance of information. Okay, so it can spill over to the second paragraph depending on the importance of the information that you are attending to. Okay, then that's when you can talk about maybe the history and if it is linked and related to the current problem of the patient. Okay, so you can talk about maybe if the patient had a social history of smoking, and that's really directly linked to the probably the complication that this patient had about the lung, an infection on the lung resulting into this patient having a lung resection. So that's typically how you can interlink and marry second paragraph, the first paragraph and the second paragraph. And at last, you can have what you call your conclusion. A conclusion then has to have information that the fundamental aspect is, like I said before, that you can have your information derived from the task that you have been given or that has been provided for you. So we'll talk more about these topics, about these paragraphs in some other talking. But today I'm just laying a foundation. As you can see, this is my first presentation and this is live on YouTube here on OET writing. So there's a lot to talk about, the nitty-gritties, but today I'm just giving you a snapshot, just an overview so that you can help yourself. So like I said, there is a way, I've mentioned some of them on the 45 minutes, how you can break your 45 minutes. I said the first 5 minutes is for you to read. You do not have to write anything. You are not allowed to read. These are the rules on the exam day. You are not allowed to write anything. The first 5 minutes is just for you to read. So when you're reading, you're already arranging the thoughts and the task and the letter in your mind. The moment you are starting to write, that's when you can do your draft. So you are left with 40 minutes to write your task. I would say to you, or I would advise you to set aside the first 10 minutes to do a draft. Just do a draft, like I said, your introduction, your first paragraph, your second paragraph, and your conclusion. And then the 20 minutes, make it for your writing task. That's enough for you to write your letter, about 180 to 200 words. That's enough. And then the last 10 minutes is for you to read through and make corrections using a pencil and a rubber to make the necessary corrections. And be tied, please don't be untied on your rubbing. And you have to practice this, you have to practice this on daily basis, how to use a pencil, because you cannot start to use a pencil on the exam day because you're not used to it, so you need to practice using a pencil and seeing how tight you are, how your rubber really is performing, and your work has to be very, very clear. And mind your spellings as well when you're writing, because you're marked on your spellings. You're marked. The English, the OET, is about assessing your ability to communicate. Are you able to communicate clearly and fluently? Are you able to write in a manner that can be understood by the recipient or by the reader of the letter you're writing? Lastly, as part of my conclusion, we shall talk about the connections or the connectivity, the words that connect one statement to another, phrases that we can use to connect our writing. This makes it more comprehensive and interesting and intriguing to the reader. So we shall talk about connecting words. Okay, so it's a bye-bye for now, guys. I'll catch you later in some other topics. Thank you.